I'm Dr. Elena Vasquez, 52, standing in the East Room of the White House watching my family celebrate my niece Sophia's internship acceptance while having no idea that the impractical aunt they've worried about for 3 decades is actually the administrator of NASA, the first Latina woman to lead America's space program. They still see me as the dreamer who never came down to Earth, the family member who chose stars over stability and ended up alone with her telescopes. Tonight, when the president recognizes me during the internship ceremony and reveals my identity to a room full of distinguished guests, including my shocked family, everything they believe about dreams, success, and what's possible is about to change forever. Before I tell you how one moment of recognition launched my family into a new understanding of ambition, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button, because this story proves that sometimes the people who seem lost in space are actually the ones guiding us to the stars. Growing up as Elena Vasquez in a working-class Mexican-American family in Houston, Texas, meant understanding that success was measured by stability, practicality, and staying grounded in reality. My father, Roberto Vasquez, worked as a mechanic for the city's public transportation system, proud of his ability to fix things that kept the community moving. My mother, Maria, managed the household finances with precision that would have impressed any accountant, stretching every dollar to ensure that her 5 children had opportunities she and my father had never been given. In our household, education was valued not as an end in itself, but as a pathway to careers that would provide security and respect within our community. My 3 brothers, Miguel, Carlos, and Diego, were expected to pursue practical professions like engineering, business, or medicine. My younger sister Isabel and I were encouraged to excel academically as well, but with the understanding that our ultimate success would be measured by our ability to find stable careers and build families that would honor our parents' sacrifices. But from my earliest memories, I was captivated by something that seemed both magnificent and utterly impractical: the night sky above Houston. While my siblings played with toys that prepared them for earthbound careers, I spent hours staring upward, asking questions about stars, planets, and the vast spaces between them that seemed to call to something deep inside me. The fascination began when I was 7 years old, during a family camping trip to a state park outside the city where light pollution didn't interfere with the view of the stars. I had never seen the Milky Way before, and the sight of that ribbon of light stretching across the darkness filled me with a sense of wonder and possibility that I couldn't articulate but couldn't ignore. Mija, my father said when he found me lying on my back in the grass, staring upward long after everyone else had gone to sleep, "What are you doing out here?" "Papa, look at all those stars. How far away are they? What's out there beyond what we can see?" He sat down beside me and followed my gaze upward. "They're very far away, Elena. So far that their light takes years to reach us. But they're just stars, balls of fire burning in space. Nothing that should concern a little girl who has so many things to explore right here on Earth." But I was already hooked. The idea that I was seeing light that had traveled for years to reach my eyes, that I was connected across vast distances to objects I couldn't comprehend, that there might be entire worlds and civilizations beyond anything humans had ever discovered, it filled me with excitement that no earthbound activity could match. My parents indulged what they saw as a childhood phase, buying me books about astronomy and allowing me to stay up late on clear nights to watch the sky. But as I grew older and my fascination with space only intensified, they began to worry that I was developing interests that would interfere with more practical concerns. "Elena spends too much time with her head in the clouds," my mother would tell relatives when they asked about my interests. "We're trying to encourage her to focus on subjects that will help her build a real career." The comment was always delivered with love and genuine concern for my future, but it revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what I was actually learning through my astronomical studies. Far from being impractical escapism, astronomy required advanced mathematics, physics, and scientific methodology that would prove invaluable in any technical career. But explaining this to family members who had no frame of reference for scientific careers was nearly impossible. When I would try to share what I was learning about orbital mechanics or stellar evolution, their eyes would glaze over and the conversation would quickly shift to more familiar topics. The gap between my interests and my family's understanding widened significantly during my high school years, when I became involved in the astronomy club and started spending evenings at the school's small observatory. The club was led by Mrs. Patricia Chen, a physics teacher who had worked briefly for NASA before becoming an educator. Under Mrs. Chen's guidance, I learned to use telescopes professionally, to calculate planetary positions and orbital trajectories, and to understand the mathematical principles that govern celestial mechanics. More importantly, she introduced me to the possibility that astronomy could be more than a hobby, that it could be a career that combined scientific investigation with exploration of the universe's deepest mysteries. "Elena," she said during my junior year, after I had spent months working on an independent research project about exoplanet detection, "you have an unusual combination of mathematical ability, scientific curiosity, and the kind of systematic thinking that's essential for aerospace research. Have you considered pursuing astrophysics or aerospace engineering in college?" The suggestion opened possibilities I had never seriously considered. Space exploration and astronomical research seemed like careers for people from different backgrounds, with different kinds of family support and financial resources than I had access to. But Mrs. Chen helped me understand that NASA and the aerospace industry were actively seeking talented people from diverse backgrounds, and that my mathematical skills and scientific knowledge were exactly what these organizations needed. "The space program isn't just for people who grew up expecting to become astronauts," she explained. "Some of the most important contributions come from people who bring fresh perspectives and different ways of thinking about complex problems." The conversation with my parents about pursuing aerospace engineering in college was more difficult than any I had ever initiated. It took place on a Sunday evening in March, with the scent of my mother's cooking filling our small kitchen and the sounds of my younger siblings doing homework in the background. "Mija," my father said after I had explained my interest in studying aerospace engineering, "engineering is a good field, and we're proud that you have the grades to pursue it. But why aerospace? Why not civil engineering, or electrical engineering, or something that would allow you to find work here in Houston where we could help support you?" "Papa, Houston is one of the centers of the aerospace industry. NASA's Johnson Space Center is right here. There are more opportunities for aerospace engineers in Houston than almost anywhere else in the country." My mother was more direct in her concerns. "Elena, space exploration is very uncertain work. What happens when the government cuts funding for space programs? What happens if you spend years preparing for a career that might not exist when you graduate?" The questions were reasonable and reflected genuine concern for my future security. Space exploration had indeed been subject to political changes and budget cuts that affected thousands of careers throughout the industry's history. But I had done enough research to know that aerospace engineering skills were applicable across multiple industries, that the mathematical and technical knowledge required for space exploration was valuable in defense, aviation, telecommunications, and emerging technology sectors. More importantly, I had come to understand that my fascination with space wasn't just about personal interest, it was about contributing to humanity's understanding of the universe and our place within it. The possibility of being part of missions that would explore other worlds, search for extraterrestrial life, or expand human presence beyond Earth felt like the most meaningful way I could use whatever talents I had been given. The compromise we reached felt reasonable at the time. I would pursue aerospace engineering at the University of Texas, which offered excellent programs and allowed me to remain close to home where my family could provide support and guidance. If I found the field rewarding and could identify clear career paths, they would support my continued education. If not, I could transition to other engineering disciplines that offered more conventional security. College was a revelation that confirmed everything I had hoped about aerospace engineering while challenging me in ways I hadn't anticipated. The coursework was more demanding than anything I had experienced, requiring mastery of advanced mathematics, physics, and engineering principles that pushed my intellectual capabilities to their limits. But it was also the first time I had been surrounded by people who shared my fascination with space exploration and understood the scientific principles that made space travel possible. My fellow students came from diverse backgrounds, but we were united by curiosity about the universe and determination to be part of humanity's expansion beyond Earth. The breakthrough in my understanding of what a career in aerospace could look like came during my sophomore year, when I was selected for a summer internship at NASA's Johnson Space Center. The program was designed to give undergraduate students exposure to real space missions and the chance to work alongside engineers and scientists who were developing the technologies that would shape future exploration. My assignment was to the Mission Control Center, where I worked with flight controllers who managed the International Space Station's daily operations. For the first time, I saw how the abstract mathematical principles I had been studying translated into practical decisions that affected real astronauts conducting real scientific research in orbit around Earth. The work was everything I had dreamed it could be: technically challenging, scientifically meaningful, and directly connected to humanity's greatest adventure. More importantly, I realized that the space program wasn't just about individual heroes or dramatic launches. It was about teams of dedicated professionals working together to solve complex problems that had never been solved before. "Elena," said Dr. James Rodriguez, the flight director who supervised my internship, "you have an intuitive understanding of orbital mechanics and systems integration that usually takes years to develop. Have you thought about what you want to specialize in during your remaining undergraduate years?" The question forced me to think more specifically about how I wanted to contribute to space exploration. There were dozens of specializations within aerospace engineering, each requiring different skills and offering different opportunities to impact future missions. After extensive research and conversations with NASA professionals, I decided to focus on mission planning and systems engineering, the disciplines that involved designing entire missions from conception through execution, coordinating multiple spacecraft and ground systems, and solving the complex logistical challenges that made space exploration possible. The decision felt right because it combined my love of big-picture thinking with the technical skills necessary to turn ambitious concepts into reality. Mission planners were the people who figured out how to get to Mars, how to land on asteroids, how to coordinate international partnerships for lunar bases. But when I tried to explain this specialization to my family, their responses suggested that they saw it as evidence of my continued inability to focus on practical concerns. "Mission planning sounds very theoretical," my mother said during one of our weekly phone calls. "Are you sure you wouldn't be better off specializing in something more hands-on, like designing aircraft engines or working on spacecraft components?" "Mama, mission planning is hands-on. It's about solving real problems that determine whether missions succeed or fail. The mission planners are the ones who figure out how to make the impossible possible." But it sounds like the kind of work that depends on there being big space missions to plan. What if the government decides to focus on other priorities? The concern was understandable but revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of how the space industry had evolved. By the early 2000s, space exploration included not just government programs but also commercial companies, international partnerships, and private research initiatives that created diverse career opportunities for aerospace professionals. But explaining the complexity of the modern space industry to family members who had no framework for understanding federal funding, commercial partnerships, or international cooperation was nearly impossible. It was easier to let them maintain their concerns than to constantly defend career choices they couldn't appreciate. Graduate school brought opportunities to work on increasingly sophisticated projects that demonstrated the practical applications of mission planning and systems engineering. My master's thesis focused on trajectory optimization for Mars missions, developing mathematical models that could reduce travel time and fuel requirements for future exploration of the Red Planet. The research was exactly the kind of work I had dreamed of doing: scientifically challenging, technically innovative, and directly applicable to missions that NASA was planning for the following decade. More importantly, it caught the attention of senior NASA officials who were looking for young engineers with the skills necessary to design the next generation of space exploration missions. But my family's understanding of this work remained limited by their continued perception of space exploration as an expensive hobby rather than a serious scientific and economic enterprise. "Elena's doing very well in school," my mother would tell relatives, "but we're not sure what kind of job she'll be able to find with all this space research. It seems very specialized." The comment was well-intentioned but painful because it revealed how little my family understood about what I was actually accomplishing and where it might lead. I was developing expertise in areas that were becoming increasingly important to national security, economic development, and scientific advancement, but this significance was invisible to people who didn't understand the space industry. The job offer from NASA came during my final semester of graduate school, when I was recruited for a position as a mission planner for the Artemis program, NASA's initiative to return humans to the Moon and establish a sustainable lunar presence that would serve as a stepping stone for Mars exploration. The position represented everything I had worked toward during my academic career: the chance to work on humanity's most ambitious space exploration program, to solve unprecedented technical challenges, and to help design missions that would expand human presence beyond Earth. But it also meant accepting a career path that my family couldn't understand or fully support, working on projects that seemed distant from the practical concerns that had always defined success in our household. The conversation with my parents about accepting the NASA position was both exciting and heartbreaking. They were proud of my achievements and grateful that I had found stable employment with the federal government, but they remained puzzled by my choice to dedicate my life to what seemed like an extremely narrow specialty. "We're happy that you found work with NASA," my father said when I called to share the news, "but we hope this leads to opportunities to work on more practical projects eventually. Maybe you could transfer to working on aircraft or satellites that have more immediate applications." "Papa, human space exploration is practical. We're developing technologies that will create new industries, scientific knowledge that will benefit everyone on Earth, and capabilities that will ensure humanity's long-term survival. I understand that you believe this work is important, Mija, but we worry about you building your entire career around something so uncertain. What happens when politicians decide that space exploration is too expensive?" The questions reflected genuine concern for my future, but they also revealed how different our perspectives had become on what constituted meaningful work and long-term security. My first assignment at NASA was to the Artemis Mission Planning Office, where I worked with a team of engineers and scientists to design the sequence of missions that would establish a permanent human presence on the Moon. The work required coordinating spacecraft trajectories, life support systems, scientific objectives, international partnerships, and budget constraints in ways that would make each mission successful while building toward larger exploration goals. It was the most challenging and rewarding work I had ever done, requiring every aspect of my education and training while pushing me to develop new skills in project management, international coordination, and strategic planning. But it was also work that remained largely invisible to my family, who continued to see my career as evidence of my inability to focus on more conventional priorities. "Elena is still working on her space projects," my mother would tell relatives when they asked about my career, the tone suggesting that space exploration was a hobby I was being paid to pursue rather than a serious professional responsibility. The misunderstanding was particularly painful during family gatherings, where my siblings would share updates about their more conventional careers: Miguel's success as a civil engineer, Carlos's advancement in business management, Diego's medical practice, Isabel's work as a teacher, while my achievements in mission planning and space exploration were acknowledged politely but never celebrated. "We're proud of Elena's dedication to her research," relatives would say, "but we hope she finds time to focus on building a personal life eventually." The assumption that my career was somehow incompatible with personal fulfillment was constant but subtle, expressed through concerned questions about my social life, my plans for marriage and family, and my long-term happiness. But the mission planning work I was doing was some of the most fulfilling of my life, combining technical challenges with the knowledge that I was contributing to humanity's greatest adventure. The Artemis program represented the most ambitious space exploration initiative since the Apollo missions, with objectives that would establish humanity as a multiplanetary species. My role in designing these missions felt like the culmination of everything I had worked toward since that first night of stargazing as a 7-year-old girl. I was helping to plan humanity's return to the Moon, our expansion to Mars, and the development of technologies that would support space exploration for generations. The promotion to Deputy Director of Mission Planning came during my 5th year at NASA, recognizing my contributions to Artemis mission design and my leadership in coordinating international partnerships for lunar exploration. The position required managing a team of 30 engineers and scientists, representing NASA in meetings with Congress and international space agencies, and making strategic decisions that would shape American space exploration for decades. It was a level of responsibility I had never imagined achieving so early in my career, but it also represented recognition from NASA leadership that I had developed expertise and judgment that were essential to the success of the most important space program in American history. But my family's understanding of this promotion remained limited by their continued perception of space exploration as an expensive government program rather than a strategic national priority. Elena got promoted again at NASA, my mother told relatives. She's doing very well in her government job, but we still hope she'll find time to think about marriage and family eventually. The response was predictable but frustrating because it reduced my professional achievements to evidence of personal failure, success in work that was compensation for lack of success in more conventional areas of life. The transformation in my career trajectory came during my 8th year at NASA, when I was selected to serve as acting administrator during a transition between political appointees. The position required leading the entire agency, 45,000 employees, a $25 billion annual budget, and responsibility for all American space exploration, scientific research, and aeronautics programs. It was an opportunity one had never expected and wasn't sure I was qualified for, but it was also the chance to influence space exploration policy at the highest levels of government and to shape humanity's future in space. The appointment was temporary, intended to provide continuity during a 6-month transition, but it became permanent when the president decided that my combination of technical expertise, management experience, and vision for space exploration made me the ideal candidate to lead NASA into its next phase of development. At 48, I became the youngest person ever appointed as NASA administrator, the first Latina woman to hold the position, and one of only a few scientists to lead the agency rather than former astronauts or political appointees. The appointment was covered extensively by national media, with articles describing my background in mission planning, my role in developing the Artemis program, and my vision for expanding American leadership in space exploration. But my family's understanding of what this appointment meant remained limited by their lack of familiarity with federal agencies, space policy, or the significance of NASA's role in national security and economic development. Elena got another promotion at NASA, my father told neighbors. She's doing very well in her government work, but it means even longer hours and more responsibility. We worry about her taking on too much. The response was loving but revealed how little they understood about what I was actually doing or why it mattered to anyone beyond my personal career advancement. As NASA administrator, I was responsible for leading America's return to the moon, planning the first human missions to Mars, managing scientific research that advanced our understanding of the universe, and developing technologies that would create new industries and economic opportunities. The work required testifying before Congress about space exploration budgets, meeting with international partners to coordinate joint missions, and making decisions that would determine whether humanity became a spacefaring civilization or remained confined to Earth. But these responsibilities remained largely invisible to family members who continued to see my career as evidence of my continued focus on impractical interests that prevented me from achieving conventional success. The breakthrough in my family's understanding came unexpectedly, through my niece Sophia's achievement rather than my own recognition. Sophia was Miguel's daughter, a brilliant political science student at Georgetown University who had been selected for a competitive internship in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. The internship was a tremendous honor that represented recognition of her academic excellence and potential for future leadership in government service. The entire family was invited to Washington for the ceremony recognizing the new class of White House interns, an event that would be hosted by the president in the East Room and attended by senior administration officials, members of Congress, and families of the selected students. I had planned to attend quietly, celebrating Sophia's achievement while avoiding the kind of attention that might lead to awkward conversations about my own career. At 52, I had grown comfortable with my family's benevolent misunderstanding of my work and no longer felt the need to defend or explain my professional choices. But I was completely unprepared for what happened when the president concluded his prepared remarks to the intern class and began speaking about the importance of scientific leadership in government. America's continued leadership in space exploration, scientific research, and technological innovation, he said, depends on having visionary leaders who can translate scientific knowledge into policy that benefits all Americans. He paused, scanning the audience of families and distinguished guests. This year, we're particularly honored to have in this room someone who exemplifies this kind of scientific leadership, Dr. Elena Vasquez, administrator of NASA, who is leading America's return to the moon and our journey to Mars. I felt my heart stop as murmurs rippled through the audience and people began looking around to see who he was referring to. Dr. Vasquez, the president continued, if you're here, would you please stand so we can recognize your extraordinary leadership of America's space program? The silence that followed seemed to last forever. I could feel my family members looking at me with confusion, unsure whether they had heard correctly or what they were supposed to understand about what was happening. Finally, Sophia, who was standing with the other interns, spotted me in the audience and called out loudly enough for half the room to hear, "That's my tia Elena. That's my aunt." I stood slowly, my legs shaking slightly as the East Room erupted in applause that seemed to echo forever among the historic walls. The president was smiling at me from the podium, gesturing for the audience to continue their ovation. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said when the applause finally died down, "Dr. Vasquez has spent her entire career preparing for this moment in human history, when America will once again lead humanity's expansion beyond Earth. Under her leadership, NASA is developing the technologies and missions that will establish a permanent human presence on the moon and prepare for the first human missions to Mars." The audience erupted again, but I was focused on my family members, who were staring at me with expressions ranging from shock to disbelief to something that might have been awe. More importantly, the president continued, "Dr. Vasquez represents what it means to dream big and then work tirelessly to make those dreams reality. She reminds us that the greatest achievements begin with someone who refuses to accept that the impossible is impossible." As the final applause died down and I sat back down, the area around my family had fallen completely silent. Extended family members were staring at me as if seeing a stranger, trying to process information that challenged everything they thought they knew about me. My brother Miguel was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper, "Elena, you're really the head of NASA? You're really in charge of the space program?" "Yes, Miguel. I am." My mother reached across two other family members to grab my hand, tears streaming down her face. "Mija, we had no idea. We thought you were just working as an engineer, helping with small projects." "I was working as an engineer, Mama. But I was also developing the missions and programs that will take humans to other worlds." The conversation that followed continued through the reception after the ceremony, with family members asking questions about my career that revealed how little they had understood about what I had been doing for the past 25 years. "When you said you were working on mission planning," my father said, "we thought you meant you were organizing schedules for other people. We didn't realize you were planning missions to the moon and Mars." "When you talked about working with international partners," Sophia added, "we thought you meant you were in meetings with people from other countries. We didn't realize you were negotiating partnerships for space exploration with foreign governments." The most meaningful conversation came with my sister Isabel, who had always been supportive but had never understood the significance of what I was pursuing. "Elena," she said, pulling me aside during the reception, "I need to apologize. I've spent years worrying that you were wasting your life on impractical dreams, that you would wake up someday and regret not having a family or a normal career. Isabel, you don't need to apologize. You were concerned about my happiness, and that came from love. But I was wrong about everything. While I was worried about you not having a normal life, you were building an extraordinary life. While I thought you were lost in space, you were actually preparing to take humanity to space." The revelation at the White House ceremony transformed my family relationships in ways that were both wonderful and complicated. Extended family members who had pitted me for decades suddenly wanted to hear detailed stories about space missions. Relatives who had spoken about me with gentle concern began introducing me to their friends as our family's rocket scientist. But the most meaningful change was in my relationship with the younger generation of family members, who began to see my life as an example of what was possible rather than as a cautionary tale about the costs of unrealistic dreams. Sophia, inspired by the intersection of science and policy she had witnessed, began asking questions about space law, about the international cooperation required for Mars missions, and about the possibility of combining political science with space exploration. Tia Elena, she said during a family dinner 6 months after the White House ceremony, I want to work on space policy so I can help make your missions possible from the government side. Can you tell me about how scientists and politicians work together to make impossible things happen? The conversation that followed was unlike any I had ever had with family members, focused on the intersection of scientific vision and political reality, on the long-term planning required for space exploration, and on the different ways that young people could contribute to humanity's expansion beyond Earth. 2 years later, when Sophia graduated from Georgetown and announced that she was planning to attend law school with a focus on space law and international policy, the family response was completely different from what I had experienced 30 years earlier. Instead of concerns about impractical career choices and uncertain prospects, there were thoughtful questions about the best law schools for space policy, practical discussions about the intersection of law and science, and obvious pride in having another family member choosing to work on humanity's greatest adventure. Sophia is following in Elena's footsteps, my mother said with obvious pride, choosing a career that will help humanity reach for the stars. The contrast with my own experience was stark and gratifying. Sophia would pursue her calling with family support and understanding, without having to choose between authenticity and acceptance, without having to defend her dreams to people who couldn't appreciate their significance. 3 years after the White House ceremony, I was invited to deliver the keynote address at the International Astronautical Congress, speaking to space professionals from around the world about NASA's vision for human expansion throughout the solar system. In my speech, I talked about the Artemis program's success in establishing a permanent lunar base, about the technological developments that would make Mars missions possible within the next decade, and about the international partnerships that were making space exploration a truly global endeavor. But I also spoke about the importance of dreaming beyond conventional limitations, about the courage required to pursue goals that others might consider impossible, and about the responsibility that comes with having the tools and knowledge to turn dreams into reality. The work we do, I concluded, represents humanity's greatest adventure and our most important insurance policy. By becoming a multiplanetary species, we ensure that no single catastrophe can end human civilization. By pushing the boundaries of what's possible, we create technologies and knowledge that improve life for everyone on Earth. After my speech, as space professionals from dozens of countries approached to discuss collaboration opportunities and share their own visions for space exploration, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from Houston stargazer to international space leader. The 7-year-old girl who had been captivated by the Milky Way had become the person responsible for planning humanity's expansion to other worlds. The college student who had been warned about pursuing impractical dreams had become the leader of the most ambitious space exploration program in human history. But most importantly, I had learned that the biggest dreams are often the ones that seem most impossible to others, and that the people who change the world are usually the ones who refuse to accept conventional limitations on what can be achieved. For years after the White House recognition, when my nephew Carlos announced that he was changing his major from business to aerospace engineering because he wanted to work on Mars missions, the family response was immediate and enthusiastic support. Carlos wants to work with Elena on space exploration, my father told neighbors with obvious pride. Our family is going to help take humanity to Mars. The transformation in how my family understood ambition, achievement, and the value of pursuing seemingly impossible goals was complete. They had learned that dreams aren't distractions from reality, they're the blueprints for creating new realities. 5 years after becoming NASA administrator, I was selected by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world, with a citation that described me as the architect of humanity's expansion beyond Earth and the leader who transformed space exploration from government program to human imperative. The recognition was gratifying, but what meant more was the message I received from my grandmother, who was 93 years old and had watched my entire career unfold from puzzlement to pride. Mija, she wrote in a letter that arrived the day after the Time magazine announcement, when you were little and you spent all your time looking at the stars, I worried that you would never learn to keep your feet on the ground. Now I understand that you were learning to lift all of humanity off the ground. Today, as I prepare for the announcement of the first crewed mission to Mars, a mission that will launch in 2 years and establish humanity's first permanent settlement on another planet, I think about how different this moment might have been if my family had understood from the beginning what I was trying to accomplish. But I'm also grateful for the lesson that their initial skepticism taught me, that the most important validation comes from within, from the knowledge that you're working towards something that matters more than personal recognition or social acceptance. The work I've had the privilege of leading, returning humans to the moon, preparing for Mars exploration, developing technologies that will support space-based civilization, has been its own reward, independent of family approval or public recognition. But having that approval and recognition now, after decades of working without it, feels like a gift that makes all the difficult moments worthwhile. The transformation in my family's understanding reached its peak during the launch of Artemis 7, the mission that would establish humanity's first permanent lunar base. The entire family gathered at Kennedy Space Center for the historic launch, invited as VIP guests to witness the culmination of everything I had worked toward for the past 3 decades. Standing on the viewing platform with my parents, siblings, and extended family as the massive rocket lifted off the launch pad, carrying 6 astronauts toward their new home on the moon, I felt a sense of completion that went beyond professional achievement. Mija, my mother said, tears streaming down her face as the rocket disappeared into the blue Florida sky, I finally understand what you've been working toward all these years. You weren't just dreaming about space, you were building the future. We all were, Mama. Every person who supported those dreams, every family that encouraged their children to reach for something bigger than what seemed possible, we all built this together. The conversation continued as we watched the spacecraft's progress on massive screens that showed its trajectory toward the moon. For the first time, my family was asking technical questions about orbital mechanics, life support systems, and the engineering challenges that made long-term lunar habitation possible. My brother Carlos, who had become one of my strongest supporters since the White House revelation, was particularly interested in the international cooperation that made such missions possible. Elena, when you're planning these missions, how do you coordinate with space agencies from other countries? How do you make sure everyone is working toward the same goals? It requires constant communication, shared objectives, and the understanding that space exploration is bigger than any single nation's interests. The moon base we're establishing will be humanity's first truly international city, people from dozens of countries working together to build our first foothold on another world. My father, who had spent decades worrying about the practical applications of my work, was fascinated by the technological innovations that were making lunar colonization possible. The life support systems, the radiation shielding, the systems for producing food and water on the moon, these technologies will eventually be used on Earth too, won't they? That's exactly right, Papa. The technologies we're developing for space exploration create innovations that improve life for everyone. The water recycling systems we use on spacecraft are now being used in drought-stricken areas on Earth. The radiation shielding we develop for Mars missions is being adapted for cancer treatment. Space exploration isn't separate from solving Earth's problems, it's one of the most effective ways to develop solutions for those problems. The week following the Artemis 7 launch brought a series of interviews and public appearances that allowed me to share the significance of what we had accomplished. But the most meaningful conversation took place during a quiet family dinner at my parents' house in Houston, where I had the chance to reflect on the journey that had brought us to this moment. Elena, my sister Isabel said as we sat around the same kitchen table where I had first tried to explain my dreams of working in space exploration, I need to ask you something that I've been thinking about since the White House ceremony. What's that? All those years when we were worried about you not having a normal life, not getting married, not having children, not focusing on conventional success, were you ever lonely? Did you ever regret choosing this path? It was a question I had asked myself many times over the years, particularly during moments when the demands of my career had required sacrificing personal relationships or when I had felt isolated by the unique challenges of leading space exploration programs. Isabel, I won't pretend that there haven't been difficult moments, times when I wondered if I was missing out on experiences that might have brought different kinds of fulfillment. But I've never regretted choosing this path, because I've always known that I was working towards something larger than personal happiness. I paused, looking around the table at family members who were listening with the kind of attention they had never given to my career discussions before. The truth is, I've never felt lonely because I've always been surrounded by people who share the same dreams: colleagues at NASA, international partners, scientists, and engineers from around the world who understood that space exploration represents humanity's greatest adventure. That's a pretty amazing community to be part of. My nephew David, Sophia's younger brother who was now studying aerospace engineering himself, asked the question that got to the heart of what my family was trying to understand. Tia Elena, when you were our age and people were telling you that your dreams were too big, how did you keep believing that they were possible? David, I think the key was understanding that big dreams aren't impossible dreams, they're just dreams that require more time, more effort, and more people working together to make them reality. Every time someone told me that space exploration was impractical, I would think about all the impractical dreams that had already become reality: powered flight, computers, vaccines, the internet. All of those seemed impossible until someone refused to accept that impossibility. The conversation continued late into the evening, with family members sharing their own dreams and ambitions in ways that revealed how much our family dynamic had changed. Instead of focusing on security and conventional success, they were now talking about possibility, innovation, and the importance of pursuing work that could make a difference in the world. 6 months after the Artemis 7 launch, I received news that would represent the culmination of my entire career. The first signals had been received from Mars confirming that the robotic systems we had sent ahead of human missions had successfully established the infrastructure for a permanent Mars base. The achievement meant that everything was in place for the first crewed mission to Mars, scheduled for launch in 18 months. After decades of planning, research, and incremental progress, humanity was finally ready to become a truly interplanetary species. The press conference announcing the Mars mission readiness was held at NASA headquarters, with representatives from international space agencies, members of Congress, and media from around the world attending to hear about humanity's next giant leap. But before making the public announcement, I called my family to share the news that would define the rest of human history. "Mama, Papa, I wanted you to hear this from me before you see it on the news," I said during a conference call that included all of my siblings and their families. "We're ready for Mars. The first human mission to Mars will launch next year." The silence that followed was different from the confused quiet that had met my career announcements in the past. This was the silence of people trying to comprehend the magnitude of what they were hearing. "Elena," my father finally said, his voice filled with emotion, "you're telling us that you're actually going to send people to Mars? That humans are going to live on another planet?" "Yes, Papa. Everything we've been working toward for the past 30 years has been leading to this moment. The technologies are ready, the systems are tested, and the astronauts are trained. We're going to Mars." My mother, who had spent decades worrying about my impractical career choices, asked the question that captured how completely her understanding had transformed. "Mija, when you accomplish this, when you actually get humans to Mars, what comes next? What's the next impossible thing you're going to make possible?" The question made me smile because it revealed that my family had finally learned to think the way I had always thought, not in terms of limitations, but in terms of infinite possibilities. "Mama, once we establish a permanent base on Mars, we'll be ready to explore the outer planets, to search for life on the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, to develop the technologies that will eventually take humanity to other star systems. There's no limit to how far we can go." The Mars mission announcement dominated global news coverage for weeks, with detailed analysis of the technological achievements that made interplanetary colonization possible, the international cooperation that had made the mission feasible, and the historical significance of humanity's expansion beyond Earth. But the coverage that meant the most to me appeared in the Houston Chronicle, my hometown newspaper, which ran a feature story about the local girl who had grown up to lead humanity to the stars. The article included interviews with my former teachers, including Mrs. Chen, who had first encouraged me to pursue aerospace engineering. It featured quotes from NASA colleagues who described my contributions to space exploration. Most importantly, it included extensive comments from my family members, who spoke with obvious pride about achievements they now understood and celebrated. "We always knew Elena was special," my mother was quoted as saying, "but we didn't understand that her dreams were actually blueprints for the future." While we were worried about her being practical, she was being practical on a scale we couldn't imagine. My father's quote captured the transformation in his understanding even more directly. Elena never had her head in the clouds. She was figuring out how to take all of us to the clouds, and beyond. The article's conclusion, written by a journalist who had followed my career for several years, summarized what my journey represented for other young people with seemingly impossible dreams. Dr. Elena Vasquez's story reminds us that the biggest dreamers are often the most practical people of all. While others focus on what seems possible today, visionaries like Dr. Vasquez focus on what needs to become possible tomorrow. Her family's journey from skepticism to pride mirrors humanity's own journey from earthbound to spacefaring, a transformation that begins with someone brave enough to look up at the stars and ask, "How do we get there?" Reading that article with my family gathered around the kitchen table where I had first shared my astronomical interests 4 decades earlier, I felt a sense of completion that went beyond any professional recognition. The 7-year-old girl who had been fascinated by the Milky Way had become the person responsible for extending the Milky Way's only known civilization to multiple worlds. The college student who had been warned about pursuing impractical dreams had become the leader of the most practical endeavor in human history, ensuring our species' survival by expanding beyond a single planet. But most importantly, my family had learned that supporting someone's dreams isn't about understanding those dreams immediately. It's about trusting that the person you love has vision, capability, and dedication that will ultimately lead to something meaningful. 1 year later, as I stood in mission control watching the final preparations for the Mars launch, I received a message that captured everything my journey had meant to my family's evolution. It was from my great-niece Lucia, Sophia's daughter, who was now 8 years old, the same age I had been when I first became captivated by the night sky. "Tia Elena," she had written in carefully formed letters, "I want to be like you when I grow up. I want to help people travel to the stars. Mama says that if I study hard and never stop dreaming, I can help build the spaceships that will take people to other galaxies. Is that true?" I called Lucia immediately, wanting to give her the encouragement that I had always craved from my own family. "Lucia, that's absolutely true. By the time you're old enough to be an engineer, we'll be ready to explore star systems beyond our own. The technologies you helped develop could take humanity farther than anyone has ever imagined. But Tia Elena, what if people tell me that my dreams are too big?" "Then you tell them that the biggest dreams are the only ones worth pursuing, because small dreams don't change the world. And you remember that your family will always support you, because we've learned that dreamers are the people who build the future for everyone else." The conversation with Lucia took place just hours before the Mars launch, and her words stayed with me as I watched the massive rocket carry 6 astronauts toward their new home on the Red Planet. As the spacecraft disappeared into the sky, carrying humans toward permanent settlement on another world for the first time in history, I thought about the chain of dreamers that had made this moment possible. From the ancient astronomers who first mapped the stars, to the rocket pioneers who proved that space travel was possible, to the engineers and scientists who had designed every system that would keep our Mars colonists alive. But I also thought about the importance of families learning to support dreams they don't immediately understand, and about the courage required to pursue goals that seem impossible to everyone around you. The Mars landing, 18 months later, was broadcast live to an estimated audience of 3 billion people, the largest single audience in human history, all watching as human feet touched Martian soil for the first time. I watched the historic moment from mission control, surrounded by the team that had made it possible, but also connected by video link to viewing parties around the world where families and communities had gathered to witness humanity's greatest achievement. The camera feed from Houston showed my own family's viewing party, where 3 generations of Vasquez relatives had assembled to watch the culmination of my life's work. As the first astronaut stepped onto the Martian surface and spoke the words that would be remembered forever, "Today, humanity becomes a multiplanetary species," I could see my family members crying, cheering, and embracing each other with the kind of pride I had always dreamed of earning. Later that evening, at the celebration dinner held for the mission team, I was asked to speak about what the successful Mars landing meant for the future of human space exploration. Today represents not just a technological achievement, but a fundamental transformation in what it means to be human, I said to the assembled group of engineers, scientists, and international partners who had made the mission possible. For the first time in our species' history, human civilization exists on more than one world. We are no longer confined to Earth, vulnerable to any single catastrophe that might threaten our survival. We have taken the first step toward becoming a truly spacefaring civilization. I paused, thinking about the personal journey that had brought me to this moment. But this achievement also represents something equally important, the power of refusing to accept conventional limitations on what's possible. Every person in this room was told at some point that their dreams were too big, their goals too ambitious, their vision too far-reaching. Today proves that the dreamers were right all along. The celebration continued late into the evening, but I stepped outside to spend a few quiet moments looking up at the night sky, the same view that had captivated me as a child, but now transformed by the knowledge that human beings were looking back at Earth from the surface of Mars. My phone buzzed with a text message from my mother, Mija. We're watching the Mars colonists on TV, and all we can think about is how proud we are that our daughter made this possible. You didn't just reach for the stars, you brought them within reach for all of humanity. Standing under the Houston sky, reading those words from the woman who had once worried that I was too impractical to build a meaningful life, I felt a sense of completion that went beyond any professional achievement. The girl who had been dismissed as a dreamer had become the architect of humanity's expansion beyond Earth. The young woman who had been warned about pursuing impossible goals had made the impossible inevitable. But most importantly, my family had learned that the biggest dreams don't take you away from the people you love, they show you how to bring those people along on the greatest adventure of all. 3 years after the Mars landing, when the first baby was born on Mars, making her the first human citizen of another planet, my family gathered again to watch the historic announcement. As we celebrated this newest milestone in human expansion beyond Earth, my great-niece Lucia, now 11 years old and already showing remarkable aptitude for mathematics and science, asked me the question that captured everything my journey had taught us about the power of impossible dreams. Tia Elena, when that little baby grows up on Mars, what will her impossible dreams look like? I smiled, thinking about all the possibilities that lay ahead for a generation that would grow up thinking of space travel as routine, of multiple planets as home, of the galaxy as humanity's natural habitat. Lucia, her impossible dreams will probably involve traveling to other star systems, discovering alien civilizations, or finding ways for humans to live in the galaxy's most extreme environments. And when people tell her those dreams are too big, she'll remember that her planet was once someone else's impossible dream. The conversation continued around the table, with family members sharing their own visions for humanity's future in space, their ideas for the technologies that might make faster-than-light travel possible, and their hopes for what we might discover when we finally encounter other forms of life in the universe. Listening to my family, people who had once worried about my impractical career choices, now discussing the practical challenges of interstellar exploration, I realized that my greatest achievement hadn't been leading humanity to Mars. My greatest achievement had been helping my family learn to dream beyond conventional limitations, to see possibilities where they had once seen obstacles, and to understand that the people who seem lost in space might actually be the ones guiding everyone else to the stars. If my story resonates with you today, if you've ever been told your dreams were too big or your goals were impractical, I want you to know that the size of your dreams doesn't determine their impossibility, it determines their importance. The people who change the world are always the ones who dream beyond conventional limitations, who see possibilities where others see obstacles, and who refuse to accept that the impossible is impossible. Drop a comment below sharing your own experiences with being called a dreamer or having your ambitions dismissed as impractical. How did you find the courage to pursue goals that others couldn't understand? What dreams are you working toward that might seem impossible to people around you? And if you know someone who needs to hear this message about the power of impossible dreams, please share this story with them. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about turning dreams into reality, about the courage it takes to pursue impossible goals, and about the moment when the world finally understands that the dreamers were right all along. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, the sky isn't the limit, it's just the beginning, and sometimes the people who seem lost in space are actually the ones guiding us to the stars.